Okay, so we're Rapid Application Development Lesson 5, Part 3. We're going to talk about writing general methods. How do we do this? So sometimes we get a programming problem where we want to write one method that has nothing to do with some kind of event handler. We want to write another method that we're going to call to create more complicated, more complex code that helps us with a certain problem. Right? So it's not related to a button or menu item or anything else, just a standard method that we want to write. How do we do that? The standard form, it looks like this. Okay, so take a look up here, guys, if you haven't concentrated so far. If you haven't written methods before, this is the way to do it. Private, void, and whatever it's called, the method name, and then something that method does for us. Okay? So why private and void? Yes? Get to you a second. It's fine. No, it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead. I'll ask you for the. Tell me the private part, and then we'll talk about the void.
Private,
right?
So it's not used outside of the class. It's only allowed to be used in that little form program.
Within the form class, that's where it's available, right? And void, what's void for?
Isn't void like when you want to change something or you want to do some sort of action?
Next. Shh. You said it right. It's a good guess, though. I like your thinking, right? No, I like your thinking, and I'm glad that you answered, right? But yes, you're right. It's void means it's the return type. So when I have void as the return type, means there's nothing that's being returned, right? If I have to have a certain a method return a certain type of object, for example, I'm returning an integer, I'm returning a decimal, right? I'm returning a double, then that modifier has to be whatever the object that I'm returning is. And it also includes other objects. I'm returning a button. I'm returning a menu item. I'm returning whatever I'm returning. It's got to be matched up with the type of object that I'm returning, data type. Okay? So again, it's very flexible. The reason why I'm saying buttons and objects is because a method doesn't necessarily have to return a data type, a standard data type that we know. It can return other types of objects as well. Okay. You probably won't get to that in this course, though. Probably going to use standard data types for this course. But just keep it in mind, if you're programming it for yourself and you want it to return other data types, other objects, it's possible. Okay. So again, there's other access modifiers like public, internal, and protected, right? Why would I ever want to use the public access modifier? Yes?
You want the access for outside of the class.
Outside of the class. What about protected? Yes? I'll get to you, Kevin. It's like when it's within the namespace, right? And what about internal? That's okay. Come on, you don't have to do that one. Come on.
Internal only allowed to be used within not just the namespace, but in the file folder structure.
Yes. So again, you're looking at these are the different reasons why you want to be able to have access to this particular method in different parts of the namespace, right? Whether it's within the namespace itself, within the class that you're working with this form, whether it's in for the entire project, where, depending on where you want this method accessible from, is what your access modifier is for, right? Okay. If I'm calling a method, again, I don't have to use any kind of keyword like call, okay? Someone asked me that, actually someone emailed me that. Do I have to use the call keyword? And again, I mean, this is simple stuff you can look up with your Google Foo, right? But let's just say, if you think about it, all you need to do is standard C-style method calls, right? So you just put in the method name followed by a blank parentheses, like parentheses, as an example. And as long as there's no arguments for that method, that's enough. That'll call the method, right? That'll actually shift control of your code from the current method that you're in to the method that you're calling, and then back when it's done, right? So control shifts. So, it doesn't do the regular flow. Your flow is interrupted and actually moves to this other method. Okay. So passing arguments, and again, it's not like you have never passed arguments before, right? In other kinds of languages, it follows a similar pattern. So here we go. Private, void, I'm selecting a color, and you know what? Now I'm passing in a type of color. That's the data type. And here's incoming color in this example, right? And here from the incoming color, that's the argument that I'm actually passing into the method. And that incoming color is what? that variable, when I pass it into the method, right? That variable color, incoming color. Yes? It's a parameter, but what is it from a scope perspective?
Oh, it's only used locally.
Local scope, right? So that doesn't exist outside of the method, because anything that I've named here from a parameter perspective, as an example, is the it's only available locally to the method. Okay, and here's another option here. So private void, my change message button click. I've got a couple of other arguments, don't I? When I do a click event handler, I've got two objects or arguments that I'm passing in. The sender argument, which is a standard object. Actually, it's an unknown object. It's almost like an archetype, if you will, right? Which means I haven't defined what the object is. It's just an object. I don't know what it is. It's like it's a black box. So whatever clicks on me, I don't know what it is, right? As an example, this is what this is saying. And then I've got event args, E. Okay? Who knows what that is? Why do we need that second argument? We're going to get to it later on in the course, but yes.
You can pass in multiple different types of parameters to it, like basically pass them in an array.
Like an array. So I have multiple things I can do with my event handler. Okay. Can I set up, and in other languages, you can actually assign a value for your parameter as a default. Can you do that here in C#? Actually, it's a really good practice to do so. So, example would be at the top here where it says color, incoming color, right? And if they don't put in a parameter here at all, so I say select color, you can actually choose a default color. So that way, if they haven't put it in as a parameter, it works anyway. Okay? It's good programming practice to kind of set up defaults for your parameters if you can, right? So if the user doesn't select anything, you've already got selections happening. Now, sometimes for error handling, right? Like for example, if you're listening for a parameter for what the user entered, and the user didn't enter anything, right? As an example, you can listen for that. Say, well, okay, so the user didn't enter anything. I'm going to enter some default text, and then I'm going to output based on the default text that I get that, hey, you didn't enter anything, right? Kind of thing. So there's different things you can do to give more response and create a more interactive experience for the user. Okay. We talked about the data type and the number of arguments or sequence and data types. If I create a method call, as an example, I have to match up the method, as an example, that I'm calling with the way it's been written. So if I have 3 arguments, and I have, for example, argument A, argument B, argument C, I can't pass in different data types. The data type has to match that I'm passing into the method, right? And I can't switch around the type of arguments. I can't say, well, I'm going to pass B first, then A, and then C. I can't do that, right? I have to pass in the arguments according to how I've written it. Okay? What about overloading a method? Can I do that? We haven't talked about that. It's kind of an advanced thing, right? Can I rewrite the signature for a method over and over again? Right? That makes sense that you can do that in C#. So now, in other words, I might have a method that takes no arguments, a method that takes 1 argument, a method that takes 2 arguments, and so on. And yes, it's very common that you'd see that, right? How do we do that? So here's more general form again. So data type, method name, and then here's when we have a return. If I'm returning a decimal, then example would be I'm returning some value. I have to have a return statement in there if my data type is anything other than void. Right? So here, as an example, you see my data type is decimal, as an example, right? Well, I got to have a return statement in here. If this was void, I wouldn't need a return statement. And the same thing goes, if this is void, like here, if my data type is void, then if I put a return statement, it would give me an error, no? So think about that. You know, it's when you create a method, it really depends on how you cast it, as an example, depending on the type of data type that you're returning, that you have to make sure that that data type matches, or else it will return with an error. So here's how it's split out. So here's your access modifier, your data type, your method name, your parameter data type, as an example, and your parameter itself. Okay? Broken out for you. So far we've been talking about sending parameters over to a method by value, all right? Who knows what the difference is between by value and by reference? Okay. Anyone else? You guys have been answering a lot. How about you? By what difference between value and passing it by value or by reference?
By reference is it passes the memory location.
Memory location. It's like a pointer, if anything. I'm passing actually the pointer in some ways to the memory location of that object that I'm using as reference. Is that really a good practice to pass things by reference? Not really. I recommend to you not do that. Okay. And the reason for that is because if you pass it by reference, that means you're modifying the original value. So now you're violating that whole namespace thing, right? Because I can go outside of my scope for my particular method and modify the original value. Now, there might be some call to do that if I want to modify when I go to a method, as an example, that method changes a bunch of values in the original calling method or calling class, as an example, right? If I want to change, I don't know what happened there. Oh, Geraldine's birthday. If I want to change my, if I go back to here as an example, if I want to change multiple variables within when I access a particular method, I can only return one value. Remember that. Only ever one value using the standard value, pass by value scenario, right? But by reference, I can actually, modify other parameters that are outside of my method scope. Okay, so that might be the reason why you want to do it. Again, I don't recommend that. I think it's poor programming. I think it's bad practice. I think you'll run into problems if you do that kind of stuff. Too much, right? Try not to do that. Try and create local variables that do something. Okay, the other thing is you can also pass not just by reference, but you can also pass by something called output, right? It's an output type of parameter, right? So here's the reference call, by the way. Whenever you pass it by reference, you got to have this ref keyword that you have to use, okay? I wouldn't recommend it, but sometimes your code may require it, so I put it here for you, right? And again, when you call the method, right, you also got to put this ref in front of the parameter name for it to work, both when you're calling it and when you're defining it, okay? You can also, the output parameter, and I know you haven't seen this, probably most of you don't know what this output parameter is, but the output parameter actually allows you to, is where you want to return more than one value. But this is something interesting, isn't it? Because I use the out keyword, right? So when I want to pass out more than one value, and you can have it to one or more parameters, right? Yes?
You have to have those in the example call to the output parameter.
Yeah.
You have to have those last ones that are referred to by out. You have to have those defined beforehand.
Yep. Same thing on the back. If you notice on the call, so here's the call, right? So you've defined it here. Here's my definition of my output parameters, and now here I'm calling it. Still got to use them.
So when you're okay, so then if you want to return multiple,
it's returning it to this, right? Yeah. So what does it return? What's returning? Is it returning? This is my question to you. Is it returning commission calculated on decimal, or is it returning commission amount decimal? And what is it returning it to? Is it making an array? Like what happens here? Returning multiple values, right? Where does it go? That's the challenge. No, people don't understand how this works, right? So I'm not going to explain it. I don't recommend doing this. I'll be honest with you. This is, again, not a very good, I don't like it, right? I'd rather you do standard methods with one return. Or I'd rather have you write multiple methods, right, than one that does all this. Okay? It can be quite confusing what you do here. So if you want to research it, what the out parameter does, if we do this, is that an error? Right? And if it's not, how does it capture the data? Which data is captured? The first one, the second one, both? Is it in a list? What do we do? What happens? Right? Because this doesn't seem to be a list item. This seems to be like a decimal, like here, commission decimal, right? So what happens there? All right. I'll leave that to you. I have this slide in here. I'm not going to talk too much about this, basing a new project on an existing project. You can do that. You can open up a project that's already in existence, and you can base your new project upon the other one, right? But for the purposes of our course, we're not going to do it. It's possible that you can do this, right? And I'm going to mention it as part of our slide deck, right? But I don't recommend you do that at all, right? I recommend that you open up. If you're going to do basing a project on another project, I recommend that you pull up 2 different instances of Visual Studio and load up the original project in one and the new project in another. That's the better way to do it. It's more controllable. And then what you can do is you can copy and paste different objects from one project to the other. Example, let's try it, okay? Because if we do it this way, like they're suggesting, and I'm just going to skip out of here into Visual Studio. So let's say I have this, you know, hello world form as an example, and I have all these different elements here, right? And I want to make a new project based on the one I just did. Because I don't want to kind of reinvent the wheel. I have some really cool forms here. I want to reuse them, okay? There's a couple things I can do. I can go to Visual Studio again, and again, I'm going to do this a little differently. You'd have to pull up just another version of Visual Studio for yourself in Windows 8 or Windows 7, right? I'm going to have to do things through here, through my virtual machine. I'm going to pull up another instance of Visual Studio. So here it is. Here's my other instance. Right now, I'm running 2 of them, okay? And now I'm going to create, as an example, I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this Lesson 5. I don't know, something like project base. Okay, so here's my project base as an example. And you know what? Let's say for some reason I like the form. There's 2 ways to do this. Okay, I've got the form already in existence. It's called Form 1. So for me to grab this Form 1 and put it in, I'm going to have a clash. That's bad, right? But what if I want some of the elements of the form already here? So I've already got an exit button defined, a hello world label. I've got this stuff here. I've got these components. Can I just drag and drop them?
I don't know if drag and drop.
Well, let's try it. So let's say, for example, I copy this entire thing here. So I copy all this stuff here. I right-click, I drag and copy everything. And I Control-C, Control-V, Control-C. So here's copy. As an example, there's a Control-C. And I go back to my other instance of Visual Studio. So here it is, right? Again, I'm using this in a virtual machine, so bear with me, guys, okay? And here I click on the form, and maybe I Control-V. It works, right? Not only does it work, and again, I just have to make sure it's a little bigger, but I can get all the elements. Like I know, for example, this form, go to Properties. This form is 392 by 334. I'm going to, instead of typing it, I'm going to copy. So I want to make sure it's the exact same size so it fits that exit button. And I'm going to paste from one form to the other. And then there I have the exact same elements. I can recreate some of the elements exactly like I want from one form to the other because I don't want to rewrite anything that works. That's one way of doing it. So only some elements you can copy and paste. Or if you have different form names, you can actually take that form itself and drag the entire form and all its components right into your project. Okay? This is a good thing because you don't have to rewrite anything. I don't have to write the code for the form. I don't have to write the the elements for the form. Nothing. Yes.
You just drag the form from one to the other.
Problem is my form is called something else. So for me to do that, I'd have to rename my form itself as Form 1. Right? Yeah. So right now it's let me rename it. It's not working. So let's say I call this my form, just to make sure it's something different. Right? This is on the second object. This object is called Lesson 5 project base, right? So I want to drag in my other one, right? Now if I drag it, okay, it has to be drag and droppable, right? So here's my Form 1. So here it is, right? I could copy, which is the easier way to do it, right? And then I could go back to my Solution Explorer up here, right? And then click paste. If I do it, and it says the source file for this project cannot be found because I have 2 instances of Visual Studio running. Right, and that's giving me the problem. But what I could do is do the same thing. I can pull up another version. I can copy the form and pull it in. I could do that. If I drag and drop it, it's going to be the same problem, right? So I would encourage you to try it, right? Here it is. I've done it before. So here's my Form 1, and I want to drag and drop it in here. See, it gives me that, no, you can't do that kind of thing, right? Now I'm running it in a virtual machine. For you, you might have a different response in your real environment, right? The other way to do it is, I know I have this form already written somewhere in my folder. If I look at my folder structure will show me everything that's inside my solution is inside my folder structure, right? So literally, I could copy and paste parts of my folder structure, right, from that folder into mine. Or, if I really want to, another way to do it, I take my existing project in its entirety and take the whole project in, and then remove elements from that. That might be the easiest way to do it. So I have, let's say, a project. I have, I don't know, a bunch of snippets that I like to use. I might have some kind of tabbed form element or some kind of buttons or whatever I like to use. I take the entire project. It's almost like this toolbox object that I really don't use as a project at all, but actually has all the components styled the way I want them, coded the way I want them, ready to go, and all I need to do is take that stuff afterwards in this, I don't know, base thing and remove elements that I don't want. I don't want this, so I just delete them all. I only want the form, maybe I want the tabbed form that I've created, and I don't want anything else. So I remove all the stuff that I don't want. That's another way to do it. Either way, we base, whether you do it drag and drop or whether you do it Control-C and Control-V and copy elements, which by the way, this is how I converted all the VB code that I did from the previous time when we were doing VB in Rapid Application Development. I converted it to C#. The elements, because they're common to Visual Studio, I just copied and pasted the elements, the control elements, from VB into C#, 2 different instances of Visual Studio running, and everything worked great. No changes. And actually, everything was preserved. The locations of the objects, all their properties that were already copied, and everything else. Okay, so again, I recommend it as a way of a shortcut to writing your own your projects based on other projects, right? So you don't have to rewrite everything, restyle everything again and over again, especially when it comes to things like font and color and images and so on. As long as your projects both have access to the same, let's say images and so on, then you're good. Okay, but again. To me, what I would do is if I was going to start with a project, that I would have this basic project, and I would use that to copy and paste from. Or, for example, if I was making a customer asked me to do a project that was very similar to another one that I did for another customer, it's way easier for me just to take the other customer's project, put it in play, and then remove elements out of it, clean it up, right? And then recast it for my new customer, my new application, right? And programmers do that kind of stuff all the time. They have almost like this sandbox of tools, snippets, whatever you want to call it. And in C# we do it this way. If you're programming in Python, or if you're programming it in Java or whatever, you might have a tool snippets or a code snippets section where you have a bunch of code snippets already pre-written, and you just drag and drop them into your code because you don't want to reinvent that stuff, right? It's almost like code hinting in some ways, right? But you're creating your own library of objects that you want to reuse. You're not actually making new objects. I should rephrase that. You're actually having a lot of these forms that have already been written that you're just drag and dropping and making use of them. Okay. Let's just get out of this. So we're going to be on to this other part of our presentation. I know some of you are yawning already. Where this is your practice section, which is your hands-on programming piece, right? Again, I recommend you have something like half an hour or so. Practice this stuff because this is the stuff that's going to make you better on your exam. Okay, you will not be able to finish your exam on time. I'll tell you right now, unless you're practiced at what we're doing here. I'm going to try and make the exam fun, which means I'm not going to make it so that you're going to be asked to do like something like this, like modify, the hands-on programming from lesson 4, right? I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, I'm going to give you something like this. This is going to be like a sketch. It's already going to be provided for you. You're going to get probably something like this, options, objects and properties. You may or may not get that, okay? But you're definitely going to have all these kinds of instructions, the same kind of instructions that you get in your assignments, with marks for each line, right? So I'm going to say, do this, modify this, change this property, and blah, blah. And if you don't know how to do that stuff, or if you don't know how to find it quick enough, you won't be able to finish, right? Now, you're going to say to me, well, Tom, how often do we have to be under pressure within 3 hours to write, to do this, an app or something? The reality is sometimes we do have that pressure. sometimes we have to make a modification, a change to an app because it's not working. Or we have an emergency change that comes in play, an emergency release we have to do for a particular app, right? That's the only time, right? But for me, what I'm testing is I'm testing your knowledge of Visual Studio. That's what we're doing for exam 1, right? And I'm also testing your knowledge of, hey, can I do some simple programming with some controls on the fly, all right? Not as an example. And this is why it's called rapid application development. We're doing it rapidly. Within 2 hours, you get kind of a working app, okay? That's what the exam is going to be about. We're going to talk more about the exam next week, because next week we're into week 6, and the week after we have week 7. So week 6, I'm going to try and do some kind of an exam prep. There's going to be some sections that I'm going to include next week. So if you don't attend, at least listen to the videos, so that way you know what to do for the exam. And that's really for me. That's it for me in a nutshell. Again, I would recommend to you that you do this hands-on programming assignment today that you have, and I also include the code. Right? Some of you, if you don't know how to do the hands-on programming, all the code for this stuff is included on Blackboard. So you can always look at the solutions up there, and there's some example codes from all the stuff that we do in each section of our presentation from today.